Hi everyone, I'm back. I apologize for the backlighting. This is the most convenient place for me to be at the moment, so yeah, I'm just going to work with it. I'm house sitting for a friend this weekend, which is why I'm in a different and quieter location. So nice. All right. So today we have the same diary entry, the second half of the diary entry we had yesterday for 1906, the 28th of March. So this is the second half of that. And it's shorter, but has some very interesting things. Okay, so there are a couple things that I should say before we start so they won't trip us up as we're reading. And so this particular part of the diary entry involves a delegation of Cossacks from two different Cossack. Oh, they weren't called regiments, but Dmitri uses the word regiment, so I'll use it as well. You get the idea anyway. And he describes their uniforms, and there are two words that I'm just not going to attempt to translate because they would take multiple words in English, so I'll just try to describe them the best I can. So the main garment they were wearing was called a beshmet. And these were kind of a cross between a tunic and a cassock, a kaftan, sorry, not a cassock, a tunic and a kaftan. If you've seen photos of the Tsar's bodyguard, Cossack bodyguard, which were called the convoy, they wore beshmet that were quite long, that went all the way down to their, past their knees, I think. And it would be more typical, I believe, to have shorter ones, but still long. So they're sort of, like a short kaftan, like a short military kaftan. If you want to look them up, the transliterated word would be Beshmet, and you can find lots of good photographs, and they are, the plural in Russian would be, in Latin letters, would be a Y at the end. So the same is true for this next garment, which is called a bashlik, or in the plural, bashliki. So these are, I had to look these up because I don't recall ever seeing photos of Cossacks in sort of ceremonial uniforms from the back. So apparently they wore these kind of very practical things. It's like a hood, and then it has these two, they're not sleeves, but they're sleeve-like. And if you need to wrap those around your neck as a scarf, you can do so and put the hood on. Although Cossacks wore these Astrakhan wool or various kinds of wool hats, some of them really wild with the wool being, big, fluffy, and others just the typical Astrakhan wool. But so I don't know why they would have needed hoods. Well, I guess hoods cover the ears and stuff. So anyway, those are those two words. You can find, I don't have a photograph, unfortunately. You can find photos of them online. All right, so let's start. On Sunday, 26th March, Uncle Nicky received a delegation of Cossacks who fought in the war. They had lunch with us, the officers, and then the Cossacks themselves were presented to the sovereign and the empress. Several of them cut splendid figures, which was just wonderful, and they had such beautiful uniforms. One regiment is called the Tersky Kubansky, and the other I don't remember. But anyway, the first regiment had gray beshmeti with white bashliki, and the others had chocolate-colored beshmeti with red bashliki. Very beautiful uniforms. I'm starting to work on the lathe a little, and true, it's shameful that I'm not doing anything, even though I have so many tools. I'm going to have my last lesson now, and then the final in 2 weeks. How pleasant. 5:10. So he was writing this earlier in the day than usual, and I think he was probably in the background with the delegation of Cossacks. be, I don't know if he would have been presented to them. This was something that Nicholas and Alexandra were doing, and you know, you can see he initially refers to Nicholas as Uncle Nicky, and then he uses the word Gasudar, sovereign. For some reason, they didn't use the word imperator, even though the Tsar was an emperor. They would only use it with Gasudar, Gasudar imperator. They never used it on its own, so sovereign emperor. But with the empress, it was different. They did not use, I can't remember what the female form of Gasudar is, Gasudarinya, maybe? They didn't use that. They called her imperatrica, so it's the sovereign and the empress. And I guess when Dmitri sees them in their sort of formal role, receiving people, that he goes from Uncle Nicky and Aunt Alex to giving them their actual titles. So this is kind of a linguistics installment. So the Russian word krasivi in the masculine form, krasivaya in the feminine form, is translated correctly beautiful, almost always. But unlike in English, where we have beautiful and handsome, it is the word for both. You would apply it, you could say a krasivy человек, a beautiful man, or you could say a beautiful woman, and that wouldn't seem at all odd to any Russian, because it's sort of a one-word fits all. And so when I wrote several of them cut splendid figures, Dmitri was saying several of them were beautiful, but he didn't mean that with the connotation that would have in English. So I changed that, but I kept krasivi, beautiful, for the uniforms. Okay, so the one regiment, it's odd that he doesn't remember the name of the other regiment. I guess he was sort of fixated on the Kuban Cossacks. And the Kuban, oh God, I wish I had some pictures. So they would have been, I believe, from southern Ukraine. I'm not sure. And I don't know why he calls them the Tersky Kuban. So I guess they must have been from a region or a town that would have fit the adjectival form here, Tersky. And yeah, there was a Cossack host called the Terek, but this apparently is Kuban Cossacks, not Terek. And there's a funny thing, if you're following my research and my program on Davos and the TB sanatoriums in Davos, there was a notice in the local newspaper once that Cuban Cossacks would be entertaining at one of the big hotels in Davos. And that made me laugh. And when I posted it on my Sanatorium Schatzalp Facebook page, I had to point out that they were not Cuban Cossacks, because the writer of the notice had spelled it C-U-B-A-N. So there were no Cossacks in Cuba. There were, however, interestingly, Cossacks in Persia. In Iran, there was something called the Persian Cossack, was it a brigade or division? Dmitri uses both, so I'm never quite clear. And the men were not born Cossacks, they were native Persians, and the officers were Russian. They were Cossacks, genuine Cossacks for the most part. And Dmitri always rather liked the Cossack regiments. He always, I think there's even a point in his 1918 diary where he talks about how he would like to join the Terek Cossack regiment that was still active on the side of the White Russian loyal to the Tsar. So I think he kind of always admired them. And it's interesting because his son told me that, so his son Paul Ilinsky actually was a Marine officer and fought in the Korean War, and he told me that he had chosen the Marines specifically because his father thought they had wonderful uniforms. And this was kind of something that was, I think I mentioned it before, the Romanov males across the board were just obsessed with uniforms. And I guess until war actually broke out, they were, always exposed to delegations like this one, where people were wearing their formal uniforms. And it's almost like saying, that you choose a baseball team on the basis of who has the best uniforms. But yeah, that's kind of where they were at. And these, I should add or point out that these were Cossacks who had, they weren't guards Cossacks, they were like the convoy. They were Cossacks who had fought in the Russo-Japanese War. All right, so that's that for the Cossacks. And then there's this last little part at the end that Dmitri says he's starting to work on the lathe a little. It's shameful because he has all these tools and he hasn't been using them. So maybe you'll remember one of the earliest diary entries back in January. He was frustrated with his, I guess you would call it, wood shop teacher or woodworking teacher, because the teacher kept bringing more and more and more tools. And he wasn't even really finding the time to work with the ones he already had. So, yeah, I'm a little surprised that he wasn't more interested in it, because later on, not too much later on, he's very interested in working on model railroads, and so some of these skills probably would have come in handy. But anyway, I do wonder if this was, just like with the literature, I wonder if this was part of the curriculum in boys' schools in Russia. Doesn't seem like it would have been in gymnasium, but maybe in the Realschule, maybe you had a woodworking course, and it was thought to be a good idea for any boy to have sort of the basics of how to work with tools. Even a Grand Duke who probably, is not going to have any actual need for that, although he might like doing it. So anyway, he's having his last woodworking lesson. He's been doing it at least since January. And then in 2 weeks, he has his final exam. Okay, and he ends by saying, the final in 2 weeks, how pleasant. So I guess probably a little bit of sarcasm there. He already seems a little more grown up to me. Okay, so our next diary entry from 1906 will be in April. And you'll start to see what I'm talking about him shifting to have a sort of more Grand Ducal role, sort of being more of a junior Grand Duke in actuality. All right, so come back and I'll see you then. Bye.